deep inside a remote forest. At the foot of a mountain where silence ruled and only the rustling of tall trees could be heard, a group of workers had been digging for several days. The place was deserted, far away from any town or village. The air always carried a strange heaviness, as if the forest itself was hiding a story. On that particular day, the weather was unusually unsettling. Sometimes a strong gust of wind swept through the trees, making the branches creak like whispers of the past. Then suddenly, the air would become still and silent, heavy enough to make the workers pause for a moment. They were used to digging, used to the hard work, but that day felt different. As they worked with their tools, one worker suddenly stopped. He pressed his ear closer to the ground and whispered to his companions, asking if they could hear something. At first, everyone laughed, dismissing it as his imagination. But when they stopped digging and stood silently, they'd noticed faint deep sounds rising from beneath their feet. It was not the sound of stone shifting, nor the usual echoes of soil collapsing. It was something hollow, something strange, almost like a distant vibration. The workers grew uneasy, but curiosity kept their hands moving as they dug deeper. The soil beneath them began to feel lighter, less solid. The vibration grew clearer, and suddenly, one of their tools struck something hard. A loud metallic thump echoed through the ground. The sound was so unexpected that everyone froze for a moment, staring at each other in disbelief. Slowly, they cleared away more soil, and then it appeared before them, not rock, not stone, but a huge iron structure buried deep beneath the ground. When the earth was cleared completely, the workers found themselves standing in front of a massive iron door. It was unlike anything they had ever seen in their lives. The surface of the door was covered in strange marks, symbols, and carvings that looked ancient yet purposeful. Some resembled animals like falcons. Some looked like swords, and others seemed to be written in an unfamiliar language. The air around the door was thick, heavy with the smell of rust and damp soil. The workers felt as though they were staring into the past itself. One of the older workers, trembling slightly, pointed at one of the carvings and said it resembled a symbol he had once seen in a book about World War II. His words sent a chill through the group. They had all heard stories of treasures and weapons hidden during the war, treasures that vanished without a trace when the fighting ended. Could this be one of those places? The supervisor, who had been silently watching, stepped closer and touched the surface of the iron door. His hand came back dusty and damp, and his forehead glistened with sweat. He whispered that this was no ordinary door. It was old, military in nature, and possibly connected to the Second World War. Instantly, excitement and fear spread among the workers. Some wanted to retreat, afraid of what they had uncovered, while others were eager to open it and see what lay inside. The supervisor finally gave the order to attempt opening it, but with extreme caution. The workers tied ropes around the handle of the iron door and began to pull with all their strength. For a long moment, nothing happened, and then suddenly, the door shifted slightly. The ground beneath their feet trembled as a crack formed along the edge. The moment it opened even a little, a powerful gust of cold air rushed out. The wind was icy, carrying with it a smell that was strange and suffocating, a mix of wet iron, mold, and something that had been trapped for decades. Everyone stepped back, their hearts pounding. The atmosphere was so tense that even the strongest among them felt fear rise in their chest. After gathering courage, the workers continued pulling, and finally, with a loud creak, the massive iron door opened wide. What they saw left them completely silent. Behind the door stretched a pitch-dark underground chamber. The air was damp and heavy, filled with the sound of dripping water. The workers shone their torches inside, and the light reflected off moss-covered stone walls. Strange rusty machines stood against the walls, half broken, half preserved, as though they had been abandoned in haste. The floor was slippery, covered in layers of wet mud. As the group cautiously stepped inside, their footsteps echoed eerily. In the emptiness, from time to time, they thought they heard noises, the faint sound of footsteps, or the metallic clink of something falling in the distance. But every time they stopped, the chamber went completely silent again. It was as though the underground room itself was alive, watching their every move. As they moved deeper, their torches illuminated something unusual in the center of the chamber. Several enormous wooden boxes were stacked together, each one bound tightly with thick, rusted iron chains. The sight was enough to take the breath away from everyone in the group. These were not ordinary boxes. They were ancient, covered with mud and dust, as though they had been lying undisturbed for nearly a century. When the supervisor wiped the dirt off one of the boxes, strange letters and markings became visible. The language was German. Everyone froze when they realized this. One of the workers muttered in fear that these were the same kinds of markings seen in old photographs of Nazi Germany. The supervisor's face grew pale. In a low voice, he explained that this might be connected to the time when Hitler's forces were said to have hidden enormous treasures during the war. The decision was made to open one of the boxes. With great effort, the chains were cut, and the wooden lid was slowly lifted. The moment it opened, a dazzling golden glow burst out, filling the chamber with shimmering light. The workers had to cover their eyes as the brilliance of pure gold reflected in every direction. Inside the box were neatly stacked gold bricks, their surfaces still gleaming despite the passage of time. The sight was overwhelming. Some of the workers gasped in awe, while others trembled with fear. The treasure was real. They had uncovered something that had been hidden from the world for more than 80 years. But along with the astonishment came a heavy silence. Everyone understood that this was not just gold. It was a piece of history, a secret deliberately buried and protected. The supervisor, staring at the glowing bricks, whispered that this was no ordinary treasure. This was likely part of the massive wealth that had mysteriously disappeared during the last days of World War II. According to history, Nazi Germany had collected gold, jewels, and rare artifacts from across Europe. When defeat seemed inevitable, large portions of this treasure vanished without a trace. Rumors had always suggested that it had been hidden deep inside mountains and forests, but no one had ever found proof. And now, here it was, right before their eyes. Yet, even as the treasure glittered, unease spread among the group. Why had it been hidden here? Who had sealed it away behind such a heavy iron door? And what else was buried deeper within the mountain? As these questions swirled, one worker noticed something lying near the corner of the chamber. Covered in dust and wrapped in an old oilcloth, it turned out to be a map. When it was unrolled, the workers were stunned. The map did not show ordinary paths. It contained coded lines, secret routes, and mysterious symbols. The supervisor examined it closely and realized it was a guide leading further into the mountain. What they had found was only the beginning. The real treasure, or perhaps something even more important, lay deeper inside. The discovery filled the workers with both excitement and dread. On one hand, they might be standing on the edge of the greatest discovery of the century. On the other hand, they could be stepping into a deadly trap left behind decades ago. None of them could predict what dangers awaited in the unexplored darkness ahead. The silence of the forest outside, the trembling ground, the strange gusts of wind, the suffocating air, everything combined to make them feel that this was no ordinary place. It was as though the mountain itself had been guarding its secret for 80 long years. And now that the door was open, nothing would ever be the same again. The underground chamber was now filled with a strange mixture of excitement and fear. The workers stood in silence, staring at the pile of golden bricks stacked neatly inside the wooden crate. The light from their torches bounced off the metal, casting dancing reflections on the wet stone walls. For a moment, everyone forgot to breathe. The room that had felt dark and suffocating only a few minutes earlier was now glowing with a golden light, and yet that glow carried with it a heavy weight, as if the past itself was watching them. The supervisor bent down, his fingers trembling as he picked up one of the bricks. It was heavy, solid, and cold to the touch. The workers looked at each other, their eyes wide with disbelief. Some whispered prayers, others muttered words of amazement, while a few simply stared, unable to speak. The treasure was real. No more rumors. No more stories told around fires or written in old books. They had uncovered something that the world had long believed lost. But just as the weight of the discovery began to sink in, one of the workers coughed violently. Another followed, gasping for air. A strange, almost invisible mist had begun to rise from the corners of the chamber. It was faint, but it carried a sharp, metallic smell that stung the nose and throat. Within seconds, more workers began coughing, their eyes watering. Panic spread quickly. The supervisor shouted for everyone to get out immediately. The men stumbled toward the iron door, some holding their throats, others clutching their chests. The moment they burst out into the open forest air, they collapsed onto the ground, coughing and gasping. The mist had not followed them outside, but the damage was clear. Whatever lay inside that chamber was toxic, perhaps deliberately left behind as a deadly trap. When the workers finally regained their breath, they sat in silence, staring at the open iron door. None of them dared to step inside again. The treasure they had dreamed of touching now seemed cursed, protected by something they could not see. The supervisor wiped the sweat from his brow and told the men that they had to report this. This was no ordinary find. The gold, the symbols, the poisonous gas, it was beyond their control. Word had already spread quickly through whispers in nearby villages, and before long, authorities had been alerted. The quiet forest would not remain quiet for much longer. By the next day, soldiers arrived. Trucks rolled through the muddy paths of the forest, their tires sinking into the wet ground. The sound of engines and the clattering of weapons shattered the silence that had hung over the mountain for decades. Dozens of armed men in uniform surrounded the site, setting up barriers, floodlights, and communication equipment. The workers, who had once thought they would be the first to claim the treasure, were pushed aside and told to remain at a distance. Their discovery no longer belonged to them. It now belonged to the state. Scientists soon followed, dressed in protective suits, carrying strange devices that hummed and beeped as they entered the underground chamber. The workers could only watch as the experts disappeared into the darkness, their white suits glowing under the floodlights. Hours passed. When the scientists finally emerged, their faces were hidden behind masks, but their voices carried tension. They confirmed that the mist inside was indeed poisonous, likely a gas that had been deliberately placed to protect the hidden boxes. It was not an accident of nature. Someone had wanted to make sure that anyone who tried to steal this treasure would pay with their life. More boxes were brought out of the chamber under strict supervision. Each was carefully examined and then loaded into military trucks. Soldiers stood guard with their weapons ready, their eyes scanning the forest as if expecting an attack. The workers whispered among themselves, wondering what else could be hidden inside. The first box had contained gold, but what about the others? When one of the scientists opened another crate, the answer left everyone speechless. Inside, wrapped in layers of oilcloth, were dozens of strange documents, weapons, and rare artifacts. Some were old maps, some were books filled with German writing, and others were pieces of machinery that none of the workers could recognize. The supervisor, who had been watching from a distance, felt a chill crawl up his spine. These were not just treasures. These were pieces of history, possibly linked to some of the darkest secrets of the Second World War. He remembered the stories of secret projects, hidden experiments, and lost weapons that had never been found after the war ended. Could this chamber be one of those secret vaults where Hitler's men had hidden not only gold, but also knowledge and weapons that were never meant to be discovered? The presence of the army only deepened the mystery. The site was soon sealed off completely. Tall fences were erected, armed guards were stationed at every corner, and entry was restricted to only a handful of officials. The workers, who had risked their lives and uncovered the iron door, were pushed further away, their questions left unanswered. They could only watch from a distance as trucks carried away box after box, each one holding secrets they would never know. Rumors spread quickly. Some villagers whispered that the mountain itself was cursed and that disturbing it would bring disaster. Others believed the soldiers were hiding something far bigger than gold, something so dangerous that it could not be revealed to the public. Some even claimed that deep inside the mountain, there were tunnels leading to larger chambers that the army had discovered but refused to talk about. The more the soldiers tried to keep the place secret, the more people became convinced that something extraordinary had been found. For days, the forest echoed with the sounds of heavy machinery, drilling, and explosives. The army was not just taking out the crates, they were digging deeper. The workers, though kept at a distance, noticed that every night, more equipment arrived and the digging continued non-stop. One night, the ground shook with a force so strong that even the workers' temporary shelters rattled. The next morning, rumors spread that another massive chamber had been uncovered inside the mountain, much larger than the first. But this time, no one outside the military was allowed to see it. The scientists, now joined by foreign experts, moved in and out of the site under heavy guard. Strange-looking containers, sealed tightly, were loaded onto trucks and whisked away. Some workers swore they saw metallic objects shaped like cylinders being carried out, while others whispered about bodies, ancient remains wrapped in cloth that had been found inside. But nothing was confirmed. The military kept everything hidden behind silence. What had begun as a simple day of digging had now turned into one of the greatest mysteries of modern times. The workers had expected to find soil, rocks, maybe even a few coins or relics. Instead, they had opened a door to the past, a door that revealed not just treasure, but secrets too dangerous for ordinary people to know. The forest, once a place of peace, had become a guarded fortress, and while the world outside remained unaware of the full truth, those who had been there on that first day knew that history itself had been disturbed. As the sun set behind the mountain and the forest grew dark once again, the iron door remained open, its carvings and symbols staring into the night. The workers who had uncovered it sat silently, their hearts heavy with questions. Would the truth ever be revealed, or had they, in their search for gold, awakened a secret that was never meant to see the light of day?